Welcome, everyone, to today's presentation on financing your studies. In the Education USA world, we have 5 steps to US study. And so financing your studies is considered step number 2. We have a number of step 1 videos on our YouTube channel, which you can feel free to peruse at your own leisure. And we will go ahead and jump right into today's agenda. I'll start with letting you know what we do at Education USA. We will talk a bit about what tuition looks like at US universities, and then really spend a lot of time on what types of funding are available. I will tell you about some of the programs we have at Fulbright Canada and the US government with the Youth Ambassadors Program. And I will wrap up with tips to writing a strong scholarship application. So we've got a lot on the agenda today. I will be talking about funding at all different levels of US study. To get started, Education USA is a US Department of State network of advising centers around the world. We provide accurate, comprehensive, and current information about opportunities to study in post-secondary institutions in the United States. And if you want to learn more about our network, you can go to educationusa.state.gov. Here in Canada, I'm your advisor. My name is Jenica Heim. I am based in Ottawa and I help students all across the country. This is a free resource, so you can always reach out to me using the contact information here on the slide. I can help you with one-on-one advising, including narrowing your search and completing your application and supporting you throughout your entire journey. Some upcoming events. We do have more webinars coming up, which I will throw a pop-up in a minute or at the end to give you more information about that. But the next in-person event I'm going to be at is the Study and Go Abroad Fair. So here's information if you're interested. It's taking place in Vancouver on the 29th, in Montreal on the 2nd of March, and in Toronto on March 3rd. So if you live in one of those cities and you'd like to visit me at the booth, there's also going to be a number of other US universities there. And when you go to the registration link, you can see what US universities will be joining. We also do a lot of updates on social media. In particular, we'll talk about the Youth Ambassadors Program. So we're doing a lot of promoting that this month. So particularly if that's of interest, definitely join. If you're an Instagram user, go ahead and follow us here. So here's another link for you. Every Tuesday, I do a Tuesday tip related to admissions, like a very specific admissions tip. We also do some student spotlights and other stuff over there. Before we talk about financing, I'm going to give a brief overview of the types of degrees available when you study in the United States, just to make sure everybody's familiar with the language I'll be using. If you have any questions, do feel free to use the chat. The chat is open. Everybody can ask their questions there. There's also a Q&A area. If you find that I don't answer your question right away and it gets lost in the chat, please move it to the Q&A area and I will make sure to answer it at the end of the session. If you're currently a high school student, the next step to studying studying in general is to get an undergraduate degree. In the United States, 2-year degrees are called associate's degrees, and they are awarded at institutions called community colleges or junior colleges. If you go to a school with a 2-year degree, you can, if you would like, transfer to a university and complete 2 more years at the university to then get a bachelor's degree. Some students choose to do that to either improve their grades or to save a little bit of money as they work towards their bachelor's degree. Associate's degrees do cost less than bachelor's degrees typically. Bachelor's degrees are 4 years of study. Now, in Canada, a university that grants 4-year bachelor degrees is essentially always called a university. But in the United States, we use the word college a lot to refer to the process of applying to university. We call it applying to college. So you will see a lot of websites that use the word college to refer to the entire process. You will also see the word institute, typically for arts or technologically focused universities. After you receive a bachelor's degree, if you want to keep going with your education, those are called graduate degrees. There's three categories of graduate degrees. A master's degree is a master's of arts or a master's of science, and that typically takes 2 years. You are spending time on researching, and usually this degree culminates in writing a thesis, not always, but it is typically a research-based degree. A PhD, so a doctorate in philosophy, typically takes about 4 to 5 years, although sometimes it can take longer. Also a research-based program and culminates in a dissertation. A PhD is also called a doctorate. Professional degrees are degrees that lead to some sort of professional designation. They can be anywhere from 1 to 4 years, and honestly, even longer if there's specializations, something like medical or dental, where you might have additional years to specialize. Say in dental, you might do 4 years of a dental degree, but if you want to do orthodontics, you might need additional schooling. A law degree is called a JD or a Juris Doctorate. An MBA is the professional degree for business administration. So there's a lot of different options in that area. So when we talk about tuition and funding, now just note that I am going to focus a little bit more on undergraduate for this one. And the reason for that is because you saw the graduate options are very, very, very different from one another. Pursuing a master's degree versus pursuing a medical degree, the costs are going to be very different. So it doesn't necessarily make sense to line them up next to each other. Um, I think it's safe to say the cost ranges quite a bit, and it's very important to look into your particular degree and program to see what your cost range will be. I can't cover all of them for sure. So let's talk about undergraduate tuition. So as I mentioned, associate's degrees are going to be at the lower end of the scale when it comes to cost. Those are usually at public colleges. And they can sometimes be even a little less than the overall university tuition. So at public universities, there are in-state and out-of-state rates. In-state rates are only given to students who live within the state and pay taxes. So if you do not live in the United States, which people on this webinar should be living in Canada for the most part, so if you live in Canada, you don't have a US, permanent address, then you are unlikely to receive an in-state tuition. So I'm just giving you these rates so that you can see the differences. There are some kinds of awards given by institutions called fee waivers. If you do receive a fee waiver or an in-state award that brings things down to in-state tuition, it can potentially save you quite a bit of money. So some schools do offer that as one of their scholarship types. In-state tuition can range from $5,000 to $23,000 US dollars. As you can see, that's a huge range because every state is different as far as how they set their tuition. So some states might be more expensive than others, and some universities in certain states might even charge more than others. For international students, the lowest tuition might be somewhere around 8,000 US dollars, whereas the highest tuition is close to 60,000 US dollars. There's not a ton of public universities that are on that really high side of tuition, but as you can see, it ranges a lot. So when people ask how much does it cost to study in the United States, it's pretty difficult to answer this question. This is annually. Yes, to be clear, these are annual costs. Yeah, I should have written that down. This is per year. So, so that would be 58,000 per year. So, part of considering costs is actually creating your own budget and determining what would be affordable for your family and thinking about those costs. Now, these are costs before there's any scholarship reductions as well, right? So then at private universities, you can see the least expensive private universities are around $10,000 $100 in tuition per year, whereas the most expensive are closer to 70. So the most expensive private universities do cost more than public universities, but overall you can see there's a lot of overlap between the two. I think sometimes people think private universities will always cost more, and that is not necessarily the case. Also, private universities tend to have more scholarships for international students, not always. So again, that top line of 70,000, a school that might have that charge as their top charge, they might not actually charge you that if you receive scholarships, right? So these are the costs for tuition. The next slide is cost of living. So on top of those prices, you have to factor in cost of living. Cost of living ranges incredibly depending on whether you're in the middle of a urban center like New York City or Los Angeles, where cost of living will be close to $30,000 per year, or if you're somewhere a little more rural or off the beaten track, somewhere like North Dakota or Nebraska or Wyoming, your cost of annual living is going to look a little more like $10,000 per year. And so, as you can see, if you have a school that has an $8,000 tuition plus $10,000 cost of living, you could be looking at something like $18,000 a year, and maybe that school also gives scholarships. And then on the highest end, you're looking at up to $100,000 a year. So again, huge range. So it's really important to start deciding on what your budget is and then cutting out any school that's kind of over the budget. So now let's talk about types of financial aid. These numbers sound can start to sound really um, big, but a lot of these schools do also have a lot of different aid options. So we are going to break down each and every one of those. First off is merit scholarships. These are available at any level of study. And they could be based on your grade average, standardized test scores, leadership qualities, community service, or the overall strength of your holistic application. So it really depends school to school if they just are looking at some sort of grid where if you get over a certain grade average or over a certain SAT or GRE score, you'll get a certain scholarship, or they might really look at everything all together and then dole out scholarships based on everything that a student's involved in. There are some schools that even have specific scholarships that require a student to maybe be a leader in their community to be considered. Those are usually more of the prestigious scholarships. Often your application serves as the scholarship application itself. So one of the benefits of when applying to the US, having to write essays and do a number of different things in the admissions process is typically that's all you need to do and not necessarily fill out another application for merit scholarships. However, that's not always the case. Some schools might need you to complete another form, or what's most likely is you may need to meet an earlier priority deadline in order to be considered for merit scholarships. So it's most important to look at the deadlines and adhere to them so that you do not miss an opportunity to get a merit scholarship. Here's some highlights that I highly recommend you take a look at. So I mentioned the educationusa.state.gov website. There is a financial aid section with a database where you can search for universities that have scholarships. It's not going to be all of the universities, but a good number of US schools do put their scholarships there. You'll find that all the scholarships will be attached to a certain university. So if you're just getting started with your search and you're looking for generous schools, that could be a great place to get started. The Florida Canada Linkage Institute is a scholarship for all levels of study at public universities in Florida. So if you are considering applying to one of the public universities, there's 14 of them. That includes University of Florida, Florida State, University of Central Florida, et cetera, et cetera. Pictured here is Florida Polytechnic University, which is a computer science only public university. So you can apply for that and receive a fee waiver. You'll remember I used that word before, to pay in-state tuition. The next two are for undergraduate students only. The You Are Welcome Here scholarship. So if you check out that website, there's more than 50 institutions that have a specific scholarship that gives half off tuition. That's a really generous scholarship. It is competitive. You'll find that any scholarship that is really big is usually competitive. Florida Canada Linkage Institute's a competitive scholarship as well. And yeah, so check out that website and make sure you check out the deadlines. So if we have any like grade 11, grade 10 or 11 students here, this might help you narrow your search and then make sure you meet the deadlines when you apply next year. For the grade 11s, of course. And then I recently wrote a blog post. If you go over to the handout section, I have a link to this blog post as well as links to a lot of things I'll be talking about today. The blog post is the scholarships available for Canadians at the 145 most selective US universities. And so what I've done is actually created links to all the financial aid, international student financial aid policies for 145 universities. Basing them on the ones that are most selective because those are the ones I tend to get a lot of questions about. Now, there are more than 4,700 colleges and universities in the United States. So this is by no means an exhaustive list. Also would be very hard for me to do. And also these are the most selective schools. So you'll find that there might be even more options outside of what's listed here. Next up is needs-based grants and aid. So the most selective private universities in the United States tend to have needs-based aid for their undergraduate students. This is not a policy that tends to extend into graduate studies. For there's just over 50 schools, and those are in that blog that I shared with you in the handouts, that meet full demonstrated need. That means if you apply for financial aid and you're accepted to the university, they will essentially charge you what they believe you can afford based on your family's income and other financial measures that you will give to them. So the Ivy League universities, Stanford, MIT, and small liberal arts colleges like Williams and Smith, these are the types of institutions that have financial aid policies that include needs-based grants and could include up to meeting full demonstrated need. If you have American citizenship, there are many more universities that will meet full need and will do so on a needs blind basis. And also, if you have American citizenship, you will complete the FAFSA, which is the government-based form related to financial need and aid and government-based loans. So you can use government-based needs grants at any U.S. institution, regardless of whether it's public or private. As an international student, you're only going to get any sort of needs-based grant at these small private schools. Public universities don't typically extend any sort of needs program out to international students. Case by case basis, you might find one or two, but for the most part, it doesn't tend to be part of their policies. Moving along to athletic scholarships, Canadians are the top international population who compete in the NCAA in the United States by far. We have more than 4,000 Canadian athletes in divisions 1 and 2. And I get a lot of inquiries about athletic scholarships. So if you go to the YouTube channel, I think I'll put the link in the chat there in a bit. But if you go to the YouTube channel, you will find the last webinar was on athletic eligibility and scholarship. So I'm not going to dive too deeply into it here because you can watch a full 45-minute webinar on that one. But essentially, there are 3 organizations that give athletic scholarships: the NJCAA for 2-year colleges. So if you are getting an associate's degree or 2-year degree, you can potentially receive an athletic scholarship. So that's a popular route, especially for baseball players. NAIA is a smaller division for 4-year universities, and NCAA divisions 1 and 2 do have scholarships. You must be recruited by the coach to be offered a scholarship. So this process needs to get started quite early. Learn about it. It's starting as early as grade 9 and 10. The recruitment process usually starts taking place in grade 10 and 11, depending on your sport. I know hockey players, it's later, but generally you need to be at least 2 years out from when you enroll when you start reaching out to coaches. You need to meet eligibility requirements outlined by the athletic organization you want to participate in. Typically, there are minimum academic requirements and amateurism requirements. If you have more questions about this, like I said, check out the other video, but you can also send me an email. I'm happy to support you with moving forward with information on athletic scholarships. Next up is performing and fine arts scholarships. This is a very popular pathway for students in Canada to consider because of the robust opportunities in the arts in the United States. So I've worked with plenty of students who've applied to musical theater, music programs, dance programs, fine arts programs, and even graphic design sometimes will require some sort. If it requires a portfolio and it's in a Bachelor of Fine Art, you could potentially get a scholarship. So essentially, if you are looking for a scholarship that's related to your artistic ability, it's usually going to be if you are applying for a Bachelor's of Fine Arts or a Master's of Fine Arts. And then there's a couple other professional degrees that would also be in this vein. Like in music, it's called a Bachelor's of Music or a Master's of Music. So essentially becoming a professional in your arts. And in order to be considered for a scholarship, it will require either an audition or a portfolio. And the requirements will be outlined in great detail on the university's website. So it's incredibly important if you are applying for an art scholarship to review that information very closely and to start really early. The deadlines are typically earlier than regular deadlines for any other student because there may be a pre-screening process. What that means is you might need to get a bunch of digital materials in early for them to pre-screen you, and then usually that's for performance. And then based on that, you would be invited potentially to an in-person audition. And so I've seen students start this process as early as September, as far as being prepared for the next year. So again, if you're in grade 11 now, searching and starting to understand what you will need to do and then preparing over the summer is going to be really important for your timeline. Employment. So this is not typically like when you apply, you don't, as an undergraduate, you don't typically receive a job as part of being accepted. But once you arrive on campus, you can get a job and you can work up to 20 hours per week on campus. It's more typical for graduate students to have employment as part of essentially how they receive scholarship. And so for graduate students, you will see that teaching assistantships, research assistantships, or graduate assistantships are really common as a way to receive money. And it's essentially employment. Teaching, doing research, and a graduate assistantship is typically some sort of administrative role. The deadlines are usually earlier. Deadlines are usually made. Oh, I actually that bullet point is from the previous slide, so please ignore that bullet point. I must have copied and pasted accidentally. So yeah, so employment is something that you can do, and like I mentioned, that is on campus only as an international student. Research awards would be graduate level funding. So when you are looking to do a PhD or a postdoc, which is even after you have a PhD, you're typically looking at fellowships. Fellowships are funding that you can get sometimes from your university. They can come from professional organizations or nonprofits. So, like if you are studying something around climate change, there might be nonprofits in the environmental space that might give fellowships to folks who are researching the certain topics that require them to do their work. And so this gets very niche depending on what your field is. Government organizations do sometimes offer funding as well. Here in Canada, we have some major government funding organizations, SHRC, NSERC, and CIHR. So you should definitely look into those organizations to see if you can use the funding to go out of the country, especially to the US. And then the government-based organization for Canada is called EduCanada, and they have a list of international scholarships. And there's a number of options when you select United States. There's a number of options that come up. So if you are looking to do a master's degree, so this is really, it has to be research focused. So a master's degree or PhD, not a professional degree typically, then you can apply for one of those scholarships depending. The Organization of American States, it's usually very specific institutions that are part of that program. So I do recommend, if you're in your undergraduate studies and you're considering graduate studies, check out who has the OAS awards. Canada is part of OAS. It's not every university that has it. And we will talk more about the Fulbright Student Award, but of course, I wanted to start highlighting it now. That is a research-based award for students pursuing graduate level studies. So when it comes to loans, you will see on university websites information about loans, but it is very rare that a university will give loans to folks um, who are not US citizens. And so in any financial aid package from a university, it's very rare that if you don't have American citizenship, that you would qualify for loans. Also, it's not possible to take out loans at banks in the United States unless you have a co-signer. And so essentially that's somebody who's willing to go on the line for you and take on the full weight of the loan if you're unable to pay it back. So that usually has to be like a parent or someone who's, pretty close to you. When it comes to government funding, you can access scholarships and loans through provincial funding organizations. So in Ontario, that's OSAP. In British Columbia, that's Student Aid BC. And then if you're looking for other loan opportunities, you would be looking at your local Canadian banking system. Give me 1 second. I'm going to shut the door here. Doing webinar from home. Okay, so those are all the different funding types. As you can see, that was a lot of information. I'm going to I don't see any questions yet. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A and I'm happy to answer them at the end of the program. We're now going to transition into very specific funding programs. So we are going to talk about the Fulbright Canada-based programs as well as the Youth Ambassador program. And then, like I mentioned, we'll talk about some scholarship tips. So the Killam Fellowships program, this is for anybody in the group who is currently enrolled as an undergraduate student in Canada or maybe plans to stay in Canada for their undergraduate studies. This is a study abroad program. So if you do a 1-semester exchange in the United States, you can also apply for funding. This is a $6,000 scholarship to support you on your study abroad to the States. We have 2 different ways to do that. Either through our direct program. So if you go to one of the Canadian partner schools, essentially you would apply and rank the American partners and then be placed in one of those programs. Or if your school is not one of the direct partners, you can apply in the open program. The open program honors any partnership that your university has, whether your school is part of the National Student Exchange or has another direct partnership with a US university. If there's no partnership in place, you can still apply in the open program. You just have to pay directly the US university's fees and directly work with that school to be admitted. So it's a little more complicated, but still possible. Essentially, if you plan to study for a semester in the US, apply for the Killam Fellowship. It's an awesome program. The deadline for this year did just pass. So for the upcoming academic year, 2024 to 25. So that is now closed. So it's something for folks to think about in the future. Again, you need to be enrolled at a Canadian university studying an undergraduate degree in order to be able to do a 1-semester exchange to the United States on this program. Moving on to the Fulbright Student Program. The Fulbright Student Program is for Canadians with bachelor's degrees as a minimum. you could be pursuing your graduate degree, you could be a researcher, or also a junior professional. This is a 4 to 9 month exchange. I accidentally did not update that slide. 4 to 9 month exchange to any US university, research center, think tank, or government agency, and it is completely field open. Students are awarded $25,000 if they receive the Fulbright scholarship. There are 3 different ways to be a Fulbright student. Fulbright student could be formally enrolled. So if you are planning to enroll in a graduate program, so it means you would be in the process of applying, is when you could enroll. And then research awards are for Canadian graduate students to complete research in the US. So that means you're currently getting maybe a PhD and need to do some research. You can apply. And lastly, someone who has graduated with a bachelor's or master's degree and wants to independently engage in research. The deadline for the Fulbright program is November 15th of any given year. And so if you are planning to apply to graduate studies, you need to be applying to the Fulbright program concurrently, because usually graduate studies their deadlines are after this. So it's kind of a process that happens at the same time. If you have more questions, reach out to our recruitment officer in our office. Her name is Iman, and that's her email, info@fulbright.ca. Now, the Youth Ambassadors Program. The Youth Ambassadors Program opened this week, which is very exciting. So if we have folks in the group who are in high school, mostly grades 9 through 11, or if you are in Quebec, it would be Sec 3 and 4 or first year of Cégep. So essentially, this is a 3-week exchange program to the United States, where you will visit Vermont, one other US city, and Washington, D.C. And the goal of the program is to work on a community service project that you will implement in your community when you return. This is why one of the main eligibility requirements is that you must be returning to your school and community after the summer, and not having graduated and moving on to a different institution. So if you're interested in this program, I'm going to bring up the link for that so that you can learn more about Youth Ambassadors. This is an amazing experience. It's a fully funded exchange. It's a great thing to add to your resume, but most importantly, it's an amazing experience. The students who are a part of it create lifelong connections, and our US government exchange alumni for life, which means you're invited to all of our alumni events, and can apply for additional alumni funding opportunities. So there's a lot of benefits that last a lifetime through this program. We're now going to transition into tips for writing a strong scholarship application. So now that we talked a little bit about external scholarships like Killam or Fulbright, so these tips would be applicable for these types of scholarships, but it would also make sense like for Florida Canada Linkage Institute or any other school that requires an external scholarship. Some other popular ones are University of North Carolina has the Moorhead-Kane Scholarship, which requires a separate application. And honestly, when you're putting together a portfolio for the arts, you kind of have to dig into some of these tips as well. So when it comes to narrowing your search, if part of your process is that you would like to receive scholarships in order to attend a university in the United States, then it's really important that searching for scholarships is part of your university search. I'm sure you saw that a lot of my highlights were the types of funding that you will receive from the university. As an international student, that is the primary place you will receive any scholarship dollars. So if you are looking for scholarships, it's important to look for universities that will give you scholarships. And so really, I usually call this step, step 2, finance your studies. I usually call it step 1.5, because you do need to be doing this concurrently. So if you need funding, apply to universities that have international scholarships, hopefully generous ones. Note that scholarships policies vary among universities. Some don't have any scholarships for international students. So it's really important that when you're considering applying, that if the full tuition is out of bounds for you and there's no scholarships, then maybe that's an institution you would skip. Contact admissions if the financial aid information is unclear. Sometimes I go through websites and I click around 8, 9, 10 clicks. I'm still looking and I'm like, I do this for a living. If I cannot find this information, it is very difficult to understand. So if you cannot find it, don't hesitate to contact someone. And then when it comes to applying for the scholarships, most students are assessed for scholarships during the admissions process, which I already mentioned. However, some do require separate applications. So this is just a reminder that you might need to complete something separately. So you always need to get started a little bit earlier so that you don't miss deadlines. When it comes to graduate studies, there are multiple points of contacts when it comes to scholarships, and this can be really confusing for graduate students. For undergrad, you're really just going right through the admissions department. You don't need to contact the separate departments or professors or anything to ask about scholarships. But when you get to the graduate level, there's many different ways you might receive funding. You might get some merit scholarships through the university or the graduate school. And then the department would be the ones who would give you the assistantships that we talked about. And then the professor that you work with might have some funding to give you based on research. So it's really important when you're considering graduate school to reach out to the department you're interested in to initiate the conversation about funding. As you get started with scholarships, you need to start your application early. Now, easier said than done. I know sometimes you don't find out about it till the last minute. Good news, Youth Ambassadors is open for a month, so if you just found out about it, you've got a whole month to put it together, which is the time frame that we're hoping for here. So start your application early because there might be a number of things you need to do, like writing essays and asking for letters of recommendation. If you have any questions at all, contact the scholarship organization. Now, I can tell you at Fulbright, we have people in our office whose job it is to help make sure our applicants understand how to fill out the application because there might be things that are confusing that don't translate well from province to province or between the US and Canada, whatever it may be. But the organization is getting to know you through your application, but also through your outreach to ask about the application. So do remember that when you call and ask those questions, be kind, but you can start to build a good rapport with the organization, and it's really, really great if you can enlist a mentor to help you out. If you have direct support with putting together an application, particularly with somebody who's done this kind of work before, that's going to help you be more successful. And of course, be organized. Um, the most organized students will probably get things done a little bit more on time and not at the last minute. If the application you're applying to does require a letter of recommendation, make sure you choose recommenders that know you well, not just people that have impressive titles. If you are in a university and you want to ask the dean for a letter, well, if the dean has never met you, it's probably not the best person to write a letter. You should have a professor that worked closely with you, or even an administrator who knows you well. That's going to be your best that's going to be your best option. And ask a month in advance at least if possible. Nobody likes having a letter ask at the last minute. This is true for actually applying to a US university too. If you need letters of recommendation, give your recommenders advance notice so that they have plenty of time to write a thoughtful letter. And it's a great idea to give them a dossier to remind them of your achievements in their class or under their supervision. So if you're asking a teacher that you had 2 semesters ago, reminding them of the grades you got in your class, maybe some comments that they included on an assignment that you did, any highlights that you found from that class will help them remember your contributions. So this is a great thing to do. You do not need to give them a lot of additional information about the other things you're involved in. You can if you want to, but they are not supposed to write about your resume writ large. They're supposed to write about the things they know about you. So it's better for them to focus on your contribution to the classroom or however you worked with your recommender and not on, oh, I also heard that they were president of this club when they don't know anything about it. Most competitive scholarships will have some sort of essay or personal statement that you need to write. Personal statements are a little different than essays in that a general essay might have a prompt that's something like tell us about a challenge you've overcome, or tell us what community service means to you, something along those lines. Whereas a personal statement might be a little bit more like essentially tell us who you are and why you're applying for this scholarship. Okay. So in a scholarship application, a personal statement is fairly common. And really, the most important thing to do before you start writing is to brainstorm your goals. Answer these questions. Who are you? Which I know is pretty broad, but think about that on all different fronts. Where are you from? Like essentially, like where are you from? Where did you grow up? What are you studying or interested in studying? What's important to you? What have you accomplished? Like try to really consider what that question means to you. Why this award? So if it's a program where you will be going on exchange like Killam or Fulbright, where it's incredibly competitive, there's usually some very specific goals. And so, for example, at Fulbright, the goal is about mutual understanding between nations. And so, as part of why this award, you really need to look at the mission of the scholarship and talk about what your connection is to that mission. So, a lot of why this award is like, how am I going to be connected to this organization now while I do the award? And then like, how will I be essentially an ambassador of that award later on? And then what will you achieve? So what will receiving this scholarship enable you to do? So usually if it's a research-based award, this is, you might speak about the research that you'll be doing. Or in the case of something like a youth ambassadors, it would be related to community service. Have a specific story to tell so that they can really learn more about you, and giving specific details about yourself and your goals will make a much more memorable statement than trying to do broad brushstrokes about your life and interests. And embrace your quirkiness. I know people hear this word a lot when it comes to US admissions. But essentially, what it means is everybody have things that are unique to yourself. And oftentimes, they're not the most impressive thing that you've done. It's more like the hobby that you do on the side. Um, Oftentimes, bringing those things in will help make you unforgettable to the reader. For example, I remember reading Killam bios, and some of the most memorable were the guy who was making and selling his own chapstick, a person that was from the United States but was really interested in Quebecois fiddling. Things like that. These kinds of details, they're they're different, they're interesting, and yes, we want to hear about your achievements, but we really want to know like what's that like fun little fact or something interesting about you that will also kind of stick in your mind, if you will. And remember that people who give scholarships want to award people that they can brag about. And everybody's going to have really good grades. So they don't stand around and talk about, hey, this person got a 4.0 and this person got a 4.0 and this person got a 4.0. They say, hey, did you know that this guy makes his own chapstick? So those things actually do help you stick out a little bit, even if they do seem silly to include. And if you are lucky enough to receive a competitive award, congratulations. Remember that these are awards that can enable networks for life. That's true in the case of Fulbright. That's true in the case of youth ambassadors, as I mentioned, through the US government alumni program. And that's true of a lot of scholarships. And so be communicative with the organization, be thankful, and be an ambassador. Um, and positive interactions can lead to long-term benefits. Being involved with networking, potential additional funding, and maybe even job prospects. So there's a lot of positive to be gained with staying connected to a funding organization that supports you. So I want to remind you that we do have another webinar coming up in the beginning of March. It's going to be focusing on inclusion and accessibility on US college campuses. So we're really going to be digging into the different types of services that are available for students, whether that's students with learning differences, students who have ability differences that they need help maybe navigating campus or need different support in the classroom. Could be also just general resource centers. So whether that's a writing center, LGBTQ plus center, or whatever additional religious or multicultural centers are on campus. So we're going to really dive into kind of the full net of support systems that are available on US college campuses. So that's going to be a really great webinar. We are going to have a panel of experts to help out on that one. Okay, I'm now going to get to the questions. First and foremost, this session was recorded and everybody will receive a recording. So if you missed something, don't worry, you'll be able to go back, listen to it again, take screenshots of the slides, etc. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and dive into our questions. And while I do that, I'm also going to keep our contact information here on the screen. I have the Education USA contact information as well as the Fulbright contact information in case you are interested in those programs. Let's see. Do most students get scholarships through the university application process, or is it common to apply and receive separately? It's most common to get scholarships through the university application itself. But you do always need to double check if there is an additional scholarship application that you need to complete. I have seen it before, and you definitely don't want to miss that opportunity. Do you have a list of the most generous universities? So generous has to do with, honestly, your income bracket, because the most generous universities are the ones that meet full financial need, but they're the most generous to families that are from a low income background. So the Ivy League universities and all the other universities that meet need are the most generous, because a low income family might pay $0 to go to those schools. But if your family doesn't qualify for financial aid at that school, then it would not be the most generous school for your family. So again, that's really gonna range. As far as merit scholarships are concerned, that's a toughie because plenty of schools will have ranges for their merit scholarships. So they might be really generous to some students who have really high grades, and then, less generous to a student who maybe has a more average grade. So generosity oftentimes is linked to academic achievement. And so again, if you have high academic achievement, then that's also going to make a big impact on how generous the school is going to be. Can you suggest scholarships for students that have already been accepted to a U.S. school that is external to the school? Unfortunately, there are no external scholarships at the undergraduate level that I can point you towards. At this point, you'd be looking at applying to your provincial funding system. So that would be like if you're Ontario, that would be the OSAP program. It just depends on which province you live in. So you can indeed apply for that. You might get some scholarships through that program, or you might get some loan opportunities as well. When universities check the financial background of the family, do they check the previous year of the family or the range of previous years? So for this question, from what I understand through like the CSS profile, is they do just ask for your as far as an attachment, and the main information is from the previous year. However, there is an area for narrative. And so if there is a huge discrepancy year over year, then I highly recommend you use the narrative area to describe that, particularly if there is going to be a big change in the future as well. I know for some families, if maybe there's been a big job change or a job loss or something along those lines, then then you would want to report that your finance is going to be much different for the year ahead. Will a need aware university that meets full need be guaranteed to cover 100% of needs? Yes. So I'm going to explain the difference between needs blind and needs aware, which I guess I could have put on that previous slide. So I apologize for not adding it there. Needs blind means that a university, when they're reviewing the application, the admissions department, they're making all of their decisions without knowing who has financial need. There are only 11 universities that are needs blind for Canadians. There's only 9 for international students. Canadians get 2 more, UPenn and UChicago. But essentially, it's a handful of the Ivy League schools: MIT, Amherst, Bowdoin. So there's a number of schools that are needs blind. So if you check that you have financial need and you fill out all the forms and all that, decisions are made regardless of whatever that information is. Now, more likely, most schools that meet full need are also need aware for international students. So that means if you check the box and ask to be reviewed for financial aid, they will take that into consideration when making their admissions decision. Some schools that meet 100% of need and are needs aware also will say on their website that they are unable to meet very many students, international students' need. So essentially, what they're saying is you can either apply without aid and pay full, or you can apply and ask for aid, but just know that not very many students are going to receive it. And so then you won't be accepted. So it's a challenge, but that's not the case for every school that is needs aware. It's really important to read their policies, because some schools that are needs aware are also really, really generous with international students. So it really, really varies. Okay. Great questions coming through. And then students are asking about consultations. Absolutely. So you can email me here. I also have a link um, where you can book. Actually, I'm not sure what link I used here. Yeah, just use the email here and I'll just type it in the chat as well. So you can follow up with me and I can give you a link to book a session. Education USA is a free service. And somebody asked early, how do you become an Education USA student? It just means working with me. You've come to this webinar, you are now an Education USA student, and particularly if we have an advising session. If we have an advising session, I will call you an Education USA student for life, because, it means you accessed our resources and are using them to help you get into your school. So everybody's different. Some people do a lot of advising sessions. Some people have me review their whole application. Some people just call me once and that's all they need. Is it common for students of medical studies to receive scholarships from medical schools? No. Going to the US for medical, you will pay, you should look to pay the full fees. It is incredibly pricey. And there doesn't tend to be scholarships for international students, but you would have to look at individual institutions on whether or not that's the case. How many students will be admitted to the Youth Ambassadors program? Great question. So 12 students from across Canada are selected for the Youth Ambassadors program. So it is a competitive program. And so taking those scholarship tips are really important, and really having a good, taking some time to think about what you might want to do with your community service project before you start writing that essay is a really good idea. We don't have specific numbers who are selected from each province or city. But I can tell you we are looking to um, we're always looking for diversity across Canada as far as location is concerned. So Ontario does tend to be our most competitive applicant pool, if you will, just because we can't pick 12 students from Ontario. They do need to be stretched out across Canada, but with only 12 students selected, not every province will be represented. All right, I'm going to jump into the Q&A area and see what else. Okay. If we own a property and pay property taxes in a state, can we be charged in-state fees? So that information is different state to state. So it really depends on what state that's in. So essentially what you need to do is you need to go to the website of a public university in the state where you own property. So let's say you own property in Florida. Then you would go to University of Florida residency requirements. And that's going to be the same for every public university. That will all have the exact same residency requirements. And you will read that, and then you will determine whether or not you can meet those requirements. If you cannot tell, then you need to contact the university registrar's office and ask them questions. Every state is different. Some states are very, very strict. For example, in California, you must live in the state. The parent must live in the state in order for the student to get, like, you can't just have a property there. You need to live there in order to be able to get the residency. So some states are more lenient and um, some are more strict. Could you provide your email address? Yep. Okay, so the email address is here on the slide, ottawa@educationusa.org, but I will go ahead and throw it in the chat one more time. So do feel free to oh, education, ottawa@educationusa.org. Oh no, I see what's happening here. There we go. Keeps putting at all. Oh my gosh. And I put a typo. Sorry. Every time I put an at sign, it kept putting that at all in there. Anyways, just make sure you change the I and the T. Oh my God. I'll delete that. I don't want people to copy that. Okay. So just grab it off the slide. And I've got a question. How about the student who's focused on sport? Are there special programs that can be game changers? I'm not exactly sure what you mean as special program that can be game changers. I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to. You'll need to clarify on that question. Okay. Yeah, and so when somebody was asking about getting a consultation and asking like, "Can I help narrow down the search?" Absolutely. That's what Education USA is here for. I spend my days browsing these websites, learning about all these different universities so that you can tell me, "Hey, I have these grades. My family has this income. My kid is interested in this major. We have these different things that are important and target this range of tuition." Absolutely. So I'm very happy to help put together manageable lists and work together. That's one of my favorite things to do because I know that trying to do that on your own can be very overwhelming. So this is where we wrap up the session. I will be following up tomorrow morning with a recording of this email. A recording of this email, a recording. I will be following up with an email with a recording to this session, as well as some of the links that I included in the handouts area, stuff to help you get started. And then, of course, a link to have a meeting with me. So do feel free to book one if you have more questions and you want help narrowing your list, particularly focusing on schools that are generous to international students and are going to help you meet your goals. Thank you, everybody, for participating today. This was a great session. You all had excellent questions. And I think, yep, it looks like, oh, everybody's just saying thank you. Thank you. Have a lovely evening, and I look forward to staying in touch. Bye, everyone.